Welcome to today's masterclass. My name is Lisa Richter, and I will be your host today. On the off chance that you don't know about CSIA, we are a global nonprofit trade association with over 500 member companies in 35 countries. For system integrator members, the CSIA Best Practices Manual and CSIA certification are some of the more popular member benefits, but you will also enjoy a variety of others, including professional development, learning from your peers, and access to professional services experts, including insurance, financial, and legal, who understand the SI's unique business needs. For partner members, CSIA offers an ecosystem to grow your SI programs, understand your customers' pain points, monitor industry trends, and share your thought leadership. With thousands of qualified integrators and suppliers, the CSIA Industrial Automation Exchange helps SIs, industry suppliers, and manufacturers connect and do business. For SIs and partners, it provides a platform to support your content and SEO marketing efforts, position yourself as a thought leader, and nurture prospects during their complicated buyer's journey. In case you aren't a current member or haven't renewed your membership, now is a great time to join and renew. Membership provides you many benefits, including a full lineup of virtual events and other resources for you and your entire team, from accounting to sales to operations, 365 days per year. Members can also take advantage of discounted registration rates for the in-person event, CSIA Executive Conference, scheduled for June 27th through the 30th in Denver, Colorado. At this time, I would like to introduce Adam Cluck, who was recently recognized in Forbes 30 Under 30 for Manufacturing and Industry 2022. Adam, take it away.
Great, thank you so much for having me. Let me share here. Oh, looks like I've been signed out. 1 second, let me sign back in. So, first one here. All right, we're back. Let me share this here. Great, thank you for having me today. So basically, we're going to walk through source control for system integrators. But before we do that, I want to introduce Copia Automation. Copia Automation brings modern source control to industrial automation. We focus on standardizing processes to reduce downtime and increase organizational efficiency. In particular, in this talk, we'll be talking about oftentimes efficiency and quality improvements that come from good source control practices and DevOps in general. A little bit about me and the company. Copia Automation was founded in July 2020 by me and my co-founder Matthew Lee, with the mission to bring DevOps to the automation space, or DevOps to operational technology. We've since raised $16.4 million in a Series Seed and an A round from top investors. And our team has been growing pretty rapidly. We're now at 20 plus team members. And this includes people from Atlassian, AWS, B&R, Altium, National Instruments, Dassault Systems, MDT, and many other companies in the industrial space and also in the IT space. And so now let's jump into the talk. So part of why I'm actually really excited to be here is that SIs are basically a perfect model for industrial gate users. And actually, since day one of starting the company, I've been talking about the SI use case. And this is for a few reasons. One, since day one, talking to SIs, we've seen them as hyper engaged customers and potential customers who really talked to us about the product and guided us in terms of how we want to build the solution we want to build. SIs, even compared to end users, often look like software teams operating from multiple offices, operating with 5 to 10 engineers on a project. You have much bigger teams that come to bear, and they're spending a lot more time in development environments. So they spend, the morning, they'll get up and write code and then go to bed for a lot of SIs during parts of the project lifecycle. So we see that SIs are actually operating a lot like how software engineering teams operate in terms of code output in the way in which they're engaging with existing tool chains. And so for this reason, and as I mentioned, I've been kind of saying this since day one, and we've seen it borne out in the market as we've talked to different system integrators, the benefits of Git accrue very strongly to system integrators as organizations. Additionally, Git, in my mind, is really the future of the industrial space, and we're really at the early part of the adoption learning curve. But what we've seen in the IT space is that it's really ubiquitous, with millions of people using it every month. So over the last 15 years, alternative version control systems like SVN have really dropped off, and we see that essentially any software engineering organization that you go into at this point is using Git. Nearly all industrial vendors will have some Git integration. And we've seen this even since the company started with, for example, Codesys building Git integration, Siemens having some amount of Git integration. So really seeing that different vendors are themselves starting to embrace Git. And really the main limitation, what I think has held back the industrial space and the OT space from adopting Git has been IEC languages. So Git is a file storage system, whereas IEC languages are rendered visually, and there's been a disconnect there, which is where Copia has come in to basically kind of bridge the gap between Git, which is a ubiquitous, well-known, powerful source control system, and the different vendor environments which exist in the industrial space. And then on top of that, we're a multi-vendor solution. So we're not only a Rockwell integration or a Siemens integration or Codesys integration, but we actually integrate with any of those vendors. So once again, thinking about SI teams that might be working with multiple different customers or have different customer requirements, you can use the same tool chain across each different vendor, which is a powerful benefit. Given that Git is ubiquitous, there's been a lot of research done on how effective Git has been for organizations. And what we see is a massive reduction in onboarding and training. This is, to me, always interesting in the industrial space, where there's an ongoing joke about someone who quit their job and then comes back and charges $50,000 to put an X and hit a machine with a hammer to keep it working. But really what Git enables is a traced version history of how code was written, and really gives you that complete context for new engineers in terms of what's there, and enables you to kind of hire in new talent and scale up teams. 85% of respondents said that Git helps them write and deploy better quality code, and we'll talk a lot about that. And then the other thing, and I think this is particularly interesting in an increasingly competitive industrial job market, is that developer satisfaction increased. So it's a better tool chain for engineers to write code in. And, as we've seen, there's been a huge demand for automation and a huge demand for industrial automation engineers. So this sort of tooling can also help, not only bring in new engineers as maybe you're scaling a team or you have turnover, but also, as you bring people in, help retain them because their satisfaction increase. So from a pure organizational standpoint, you see a lot of benefit with Git. And then ultimately, Git and source control are kind of interesting in that, there's a lot of products where you say, hey, here's the one thing, we're dropping the cost of producing this component by 10% or that sort of benefit. But with Git, you really see pain and friction across the entire development process that gets resolved by good source control practices. The first being lost code or use of backup that's too old. Searching endlessly for code to reuse. So just engineers not being able to reuse or leverage internal knowledge within an organization effectively. Maintaining multiple versions of a file. Issues of seeing the difference between versions. So, the current process for seeing difference between versions of code is to pull up two different source files and run them through maybe some sort of external compare tool, or alternatively, actually just visually trying to determine the difference between versions of code. Struggling with quickly sharing code. So we see a lot of people kind of get lost between email or USB or a shared network drive. There's a lot of different ways in which code gets shared. Is not consistent within an organization, which once again gets back to the challenge of finding and reusing code. Working off of versions that are outdated. So if you can't find the most recent version of your code, you're likely to actually stem your changes from the wrong part of the code base. Can't track who changed what, when, and why. And this is often actually something that comes up in the relationship between system integrators and their customers and vice versa, where someone can build out a solution for a customer. That solution was changed by the customer, and then you come back into the site and you're trying to understand what happened. Having good version control practices and working with your customers on good version control practices can actually enable a lot of clarity in terms of that relationship. And then finally, scaling teams can be difficult without Git. So understanding who has access to what code, making sure that code is shared broadly across the team, being able to leverage everyone on your team to work on the same project. So, and we'll talk about that benefit more, but there's a lot of ways in which without good source control practices, it becomes really hard to manage larger software teams. And so when you start looking at all of these different places in the workflow where Git adds benefit, where right now there's actually pain in the development process, you start seeing, ROI immediately in terms of efficiency, and then ultimately quality of the end product that you're delivering to your customers. And obviously, the velocity with which you can deliver that product over time. And you imagine how, if you're an engineer, this is kind of adding up in your workflow over time as you're running into each of these issues on a day-to-day basis. We've actually gotten this from working with SIs. So one of our early customers was DMC, who already had some familiarity with standard Git tools. But what they found is that code review processes were extremely difficult and an organizational blocker with traditional Git tools. And we'll talk more about how Copia enables visual code review in IEC languages, which are familiar to controls engineers. And the team needed faster maintenance of code quality through that. And once we introduced Copia to DMC, and you're seeing a little bit of a visual diagram of what our code review tool looks like, we quickly heard from the team that Copia was providing senior controls team with roughly 8 hours back a month in just code review practices. So this is making it much, much, much easier for the senior engineers on the team to actually manage quality across the organization. Similarly, we heard from another project engineer that Copia provides exactly the tool our automation team has been looking for. It provides visibility into processes that otherwise had none. It saved us so much time and headache while also ensuring that our projects are executed using all software development best practices. We can't praise it enough. And so really, again, we're seeing this, like this constant friction in the development process that good source control practices, eliminate. Similarly, we worked with another company called Camp, and the Camp team was experiencing issues with code versioning, and this is causing problems in production. They had difficult understanding the context of their code base. In general, the team suffered from a lack of visibility into the team's productivity, and you can kind of see here on the right, this is our image of the classic archive folder, which is the standard source control. Is basically the standard in the industry right now from a source control perspective, where you have file name, date, and the name of the person making the changes, and you're storing it just in a local disk drive or a network drive. And then with Copia, it actually gave visibility into who was working on what. So it provided visibility to the entire team's work and gives rich context in any change. Enables them to review PLC programs without opening the files in Studio 5000. It easily saves us 2 to 3 hours of work per engineer per week. And this is actually one of our hero metrics. And we kind of came across this with DMC and Camp. You're seeing, DMC substantial saving on a level of, 8 hours a month, aka 2 hours a week for senior engineers on code review. And then with Camp, you're seeing 2 to 3 hours of work per engineer per week. And so you're really looking at, as you adopt this across a broader organization, you're actually almost gaining engineers in terms of the efficiency for the organization. And as you scale with good source control practices, you actually come to see that teams get more and more efficient from it. So it really adds a lot of benefit by reducing all of those friction points in the development process and enabling teams to truly scale. With these sorts of examples, we see that competitive organizations will adopt Git to deliver quality solutions to market more quickly. So the end result of this time saving is that you can actually operate more quickly as an organization and get products to market more quickly. There's a lot of environments, obviously, where time to market is super important. Missing 1 or 2 days on a project can actually cost system integrators money and cost their customers money. So I always like to say, the cost of, not shipping, Ford's new F-150 line is, tens of millions of dollars a day in revenue. You really start to see that, shipping product, bringing new production to market more quickly adds direct benefit to your customers and obviously, adds benefit to the team as well, especially if you can reduce the overall pain of the development process and the number of hours that your engineers are working, which obviously again ties to retention. So that's kind of an overview of some of the benefits of Git and what we've seen with organizations that we've gone into. The next section of this is going to be more of a deep dive, or I will say a high-level deep dive into what Git is. So we're not talking in pure abstraction. But before we even dive into Git specifically, Git is a flavor of source control. So what is source control? And I always say that source control is a common sense approach, but has a transformative result. So nothing that you recommend with source control is something that I think any engineering organization would say is crazy. So for example, you're replacing file name, .date, and text with constant context on what has changed in given files. And so basically, you're just committing code and storing the context of that code change over time. But this sort of constant keeping track of context, constantly keeping track of what code has changed over time actually enables you to drive organizational efficiency, recoverability for end users, and then quality, as we've been talking about. And the problem really comes down to the fact that the standard approach, the archive folder, aka copy, paste, rename, which is the standard approach to storing backups in the industrial space right now, provides a very limited context. Looking at this, it's really hard to understand what's changed. Oftentimes, the people store these at the granularity of once a day, copy, paste, rename, or every other day. And so really, you don't know what changed in that day. You have no context about, you have no snapshot history of what changed in a particular unit of work that an engineer is doing. So it becomes really hard to backpedal and get to where you need to go in terms of understanding where the code base is at, and if something breaks, what changed. And so when we start looking at the archive folder even more broadly, you also start to see other benefits with source control. So for example, version control allows granular snapshots, whereas an archive folder is often a backup file. With source control, you understand who changed your code, when and why, whereas with the archive folder, it's hard to understand who or why code changed. Access controls to specific repositories, whereas with an archive folder, if it's on a network drive, if it's getting emailed to people, if it's on a USB stick, gating access is really difficult. So you can't say, hey, these set of customers can write to this, but these other customers can only read to this, or you can't say, these engineers internally can read to this, or can read this code, but they can't write it. So really managing who has access to different pieces of code become difficult. And then ultimately, one of the major benefits of source control, and this is another one of those organizational efficiency and quality arguments, is that it encourages reusable code with the central repository. And so having that sort of like base of reusable code that can be accessed, that's actually learned organizational heritage of what code you've built for different customers and different code that you have internally actually enables you to drive higher quality on the next project, because you're actually sharing code broadly within an organization. Then we also see additionally, libraries and AOIs and reusable code from different vendors as well. So whereas, with the archive folder, code is often scattered on C drives, email accounts, et cetera. So that's source control, and most source control systems should provide some of that benefit. But what's Git, and why did Git become so popular compared to, let's say, Subversion, which is still often used in the industrial space, or check in and out systems? Well, first of all, it was made by the inventor of Linux. It's 15 years old, it's ubiquitous. And really one of the biggest benefits of Git, I think, as you think about adopting it for an organization, as well, SVN as a technology, and some of these check in and out, homespun check in and out systems are on the decline. Git is extremely well supported because you have millions of engineers working on it. You also have teams at Microsoft, Google, Facebook, all of these large engineering organizations that put engineers towards improving the underlying implementation of Git. So certain parts of Git scalability comes from the fact that literally Microsoft wasn't able to scale that, and they just contributed engineering resources to improving it. So really with Git, you get an ecosystem of solutions. And to give like a very clear example of where we've seen this benefit is, we've had people asking for, certain integrations with external vendors, external tool chains. And what we found is that, there was already a Git integration there. And so just because you're using Git under the hood, you actually get access to this broader ecosystem of solutions. But on top of that, and why I think Git is uniquely interesting, and is actually somewhat shocking to me that people will use, Subversion and other systems within the industrial space, is that Git is distributed, which means it works offline. And so if you're commissioning and you want to commit code because you have low network conditions and then push it at the end of the day, put it to the server later, Git supports that. So Git has a very nice offline workflow, which I think makes it really powerful in industrial use case. And then additionally, you have the capacity for branching and merging rather than locking. So the standard workflow for a lot of products right now is that you lock your code and then only one person can work on it at a time. Whereas what Git unlocks and what's super, super powerful is you can actually have multiple engineers work on the same project at the same time. So you can actually drive a solution to market more quickly. And so then how does Git in particular drive productivity improvements and some of the benefits that we're talking about? Well, first of all, shared code, so that discovery and templating, the merge flow, which as I mentioned, enables multiple engineers to work on the same project at the same time, code review, which enables you to catch issues earlier in the development process before code gets to production or maybe even gets in a client's hands. And then revision history, which enables you to revert bad code. So if you do end up deploying a regression into production, you can quickly revert those changes because you have a perfect history of what happened. And then ultimately, and oftentimes when adopting new tools, there's a concern about onboarding for teams. Millions of people use Git for their daily workflows. So in practice, it's easy. If millions of engineers use it every month, it's a relatively quick learning curve. Otherwise, it just wouldn't have been adopted so broadly. When we talk about the theory of Git, we use this term like fully distributed, which is kind of a computer sciencey term. But really all it means is that you have a centralized remote repository, and this could be sitting on a server in your own virtual private cloud. It could be a cloud server, a broad cloud server in general, like our solution, wherever, but you have a Git repository sitting there. And then you have local revisions, or so this local 1, local 2, local 3 really represent, a local, an engineer's machine. And so you really see code on these machines running, and then you're pushing and pulling from the repository. So really, as you make these local changes, you then push them up to the mothership later. And then it's easy to migrate to Git. So, oh, sorry, I missed a slide here. And then in order to make this work, Git utilizes branching and merging. And so really what we see is you have a main branch, which is kind of your source of truth for where your code base is. The engineers can kind of branch code off of it. So they can find the most recent version. They can make changes in their local scratch space, and then they can merge it into the main branch. And then ultimately it's easy to migrate to Git. So, and this is actually a big thing for us, and part of why we really start working with Git to begin with is that you don't want to have to make it so people are spending days and weeks migrating to a new version control system. It really should be very easy. And with Git, it exists in the file system. So a folder becomes a repository. It's simply a copy and paste operation. And we often see people adopt in 10 minutes. So this is a screenshot of what a Git migration might look like, where you're copying and pasting code from an existing archive folder into your Git repository, and then you can kind of kick off some of the benefits. And from there, working in Git is a really simple process. So you're really saving projects in your native IDE. Git picks up on those changes. So as opposed to doing copy, paste, rename operation like you would historically, Git's picking up on these saved projects. That just as you're making those changes, you can save a snapshot. That's called a commit. So you're making a local snapshot of your changes, and this actually enables people, as opposed to the archive folder, or maybe you're making one copy a day, to make a lot of snapshots, more granular snapshots that represent the actual units of work that they're doing throughout their workday. And then they can sync that back to the Copia server. And that's also the offline to online flow, where, if you're commissioning and you don't have good internet access, you can save all your snapshots and then push that code when you get back to the hotel or at the end of the week. So it's very powerful. And ultimately, the solution's automatically detecting changes visually and saving in your ID will simply enable Copia to pick up on those changes, or enable Git to pick up on those changes, enable you to commit and push them. So it's a very simple workflow on day one, but with that simple workflow, you can ultimately always access the commit history. So here's an example of a visual differential. You can see this update right to left L5X, and then you can see that we removed a rung on the right. So you see this kind of very quick visual understanding of what changed in each project. You can also granularly revert. So you can say, hey, I want to knock out this change, which caused an issue. You can review changes. So this is code review screen. We also have inline run commenting, so you can actually review right on the code. And then that code review always stays there, which is actually very powerful as well. So even when someone resolves a change, if you're working with a client and they want to review your code, well, now you have a record of the conversation that you had. So you can be like, well, this is why we built it this way, or this is why we made the decision that we did. You can merge your code, and we have a merge tool that visually enables you to automatically stitch your code together, which is really powerful. Actually saves engineers hours of trying to resolve two people's changes to the same file. And that's once again what enables multiple people to work on the same project at the same time, which accelerates go-to-market. You can manage all code reviews and see active issues at a glance. You can really say, hey, what's happening within our project right now? Who's writing code? What issues do we have that we need to resolve? It gives complete visibility from a managerial perspective into the state of your project. And then if you're a senior engineer, you can almost live on the screen and go from code review to code review to code review and really capture what changed there. And then also managing org-wide code access and privileges. So you can see here as an example of, hey, we're going to add members to a team, but we're only going to give them write access, or we're going to give them write access. We're going to give them read access. So you can say, hey, these people should be able to read this code, but these other people should be able to write this code. This becomes a really powerful way of managing, who has access to what code and what level of granularity of access they have, something that's basically impossible to do in an archive folder world. And so when you start looking at all these benefits, and this is where I say a lot of this stuff is common sense, you also though come out with basically a transformative workflow. For organizations, you're really seeing deep collaboration between engineers with the ability to merge code into projects. You can put multiple engineers on the same project at the same time. All changes are tracked. So you're really having a system where you're keeping track of how your project is evolving over time, which enables anyone to come into that project. And also as a kind of managerial class, enables people to understand, what's happening within their projects. All code is reviewed. So you really see this process by which suddenly, every change as it's going into production can be reviewed. And then approval for changes is explicit. And this can be really powerful as well when working with customers, where you have this actual code review process and approval process that makes sure that everyone's aligned on different changes as they're going into production. But it can also be used for internal teams as well. So you can have a senior engineer who's managing quality and can say, hey, now this change is good to go. So you have this whole system in place for managing quality, and you're driving efficiency through deeper collaboration between engineers. And so, this kind of gets to the core 3 benefits. And I always come back to these benefits anytime I'm really talking about source control, Git, DevOps, which is efficiency, quality, and uptime. And so you're looking at shorter project timelines. You're allowing multiple engineers to be staffed on a project simultaneously. You prevent code mishaps from delaying the timeline through the code review process. You have improved end quality. You can monitor your team workflows and implement code reviews to ensure high quality of changes, and understand the context of why changes were made, even as you're reviewing your code over time, or you're looking back at your own revision history on a project that you're working on. And this also results in reduced downtime. And this is somewhat of an end user benefit, but also is a benefit for system integrators who are often called into service projects, which is that you can always revert to the last good version during downtime. So you can actually understand, hey, this is what changed. Let's go back to a working version. And you can also ensure that the correct project version is deployed. So, if you come into a project and you're like, hey, this is the last version that we had in source control, but we see what's on the machine is different, which we hear is very common when there's issues in production. You can say, well, what changed? You can see that change immediately, and you can recognize that there is something that happened on site that actually caused the downtime incident. And so, with all of these benefits, I think it's often asked, like, well, why didn't get adopted within industrials, and why is this just happening now? And I think really what we've seen is that it's been slowed down by the nature of the tool chains in the industrial space. Every different vendor has its own industrial file type. These are often in binary. Recently, there's been XML files that have come out that have made it easier to build tool chains like ours. Visual code representation, so the IEC language protocols make it so that people program in a visual language, whereas the files are binary or text-based. And then, vendor specific integration. So, even as you go into the kind of work of, hey, let's take Git and try and make it work for this vendor, you're still actually, building out really specific integration. So all of these industrial file types, all these visual code representations, as we all know, are slightly different on a vendor by vendor basis, which makes it really challenging, even if you do gain familiarity with one vendor, to make Git work across all those other vendors. And so really this is where Copia has come in, and really the value that we intend to deliver to the space is that we provide support for industrial file types. We make Git work well with industrial file types, and we enable rendering of visual programs. So if you're talking about merging, well, that's really hard to do on binary files, but we render those files and then do visual merging. Or code review is a lot more useful if you can have inline run commenting on visual code changes and visual diffs. We enable that along with just the standard workflow that we showed of, as you're making your changes, you're seeing the differential, what code you've actually written over the last 2 or 3 hours in a screen immediately. So we even see people, outside of the code review process and all of that, just, have the desktop app in the background just to understand what changes they've been introducing to their code over a working session. Ultimately, to get into the kind of bigger vision for Copia, our goal is to bring DevOps to the space. So DevOps is an even broader set of practices that basically enable us to remove manual steps to develop code quickly, reduce downtime, and up-level operational efficiency. And this involves Git-based source control and collaboration as kind of a base level. But once you're adopting really good Git-based source control practices, you can also start to automatically test that code. And actually, we've seen a lot of vendors, even in the last year, start to come out with emulated environments and even testing environments that you can start to kick off as a result of storing those changes. And additionally, we've definitely heard of situations where end users have really strong testing requirements. So if you're talking about the SI use case, end users building out these suites of automated tests, or SIs writing the code to write the test for users, could be a new vertical for products to deliver to customers. Deployment management, so how does code actually get onto the machines, and how do you actually manage those machines? And then also, what code is running on those machines? What have people deployed? Ideally, you have a system for deploying code to the machines, but often people will always probably push code directly at PLC. So having a way of capturing that when it happens is important as well. And then observability and monitoring. So there's been a lot of push towards, additional data ingestion through Industry 4.0. There's always been SCADA in the industrial space, but integrating that into a workflow so that you can, have code that is pushed through a Git-based source control solution that's tested automatically, that you then deploy to these machines through this deployment system. And then if you deploy a regression, you can roll back easily, is really the vision of DevOps. It's a whole new way of writing code in the industrial space. And Git is really the root of all DevOps. And that's why we've started our company around Git, is that once you have good Git-based source control practices, it sets you up for the rest of the tool chain. But ultimately, our goal as a company is to build this full DevOps stack. And what we've seen, and as I mentioned, DevOps and Git have been around in the IT space for a long time, is that organizations that adopt these solutions have spent a lot less time having to manage the quality of their product in production. So basically, they're able to capture issues earlier and resolve them more quickly. So they've spent less time having to redo projects, remediating security issues, working on defects for end users. They're able to support customers more easily and spend more time on new work. So as opposed to supporting old code, old issues, you're spending more time as an organization, you're driving ROI for your organization through being able to focus on new projects and new customers. So DevOps and Git as the root of DevOps will enable companies to deliver projects faster, reduce downtime, and increase overall quality. And so Copia enables modern DevOps practices to be used in PLC programming, ultimately streamlining how industrial machinery is commissioned and operated. And we're hoping that adopting these processes build the foundation for continued innovation within the industrial space as well, for people to build more projects, to work on more ambitious projects with customers, to drive more change in their organizations, because making changes becomes ultimately easier when you have these sorts of solutions in place. And we really believe when you bring all of this together, that it's the future of manufacturing. We've been carried into the space by teams looking for this solution. Many of our customers, and even inbound from the early days of our company, where Fortune 50 and Fortune 500 companies that already recognize some of these problems internally have been trying to build solutions for themselves internally, but want to turn to a vendor to build the solution for them. And this is where I see benefit for system integrators to be working with really strong customers around these sorts of solutions. And what we saw in the IT world, and what I truly believe we're going to see in the OT world is that this is a great filter moment where high execution teams will leap ahead. The benefits of DevOps, the benefits of Git are so broad and so fundamentally transform the way that code is written and deployed in any sort of environment, that it's going to be ultimately the organizations that adopt these practices and do them really well that will win out over the next 5 years. As I mentioned at the start of this talk, I really do believe SIs will be the ones that drive this broad adoption because they see so much immediate benefit from Git, as we've talked about throughout this. And in terms of engaging with us and how we work with SIs, we do free trials for SI teams. We do team onboardings, and then we have customer success. We have a customer success team that works on training teams and up-leveling them. Because we do believe that SIs will drive broad adoption in this space, we're offering discounts and bulk deals for CSIA members in particular, to make it appealing and easy for system integrators to adopt this. And we ultimately want to grow together and hope SIs will deliver DevOps solutions to their customers and really drive this sort of innovation throughout the space over the next few years. And we're hoping to partner with you all on that. And then finally, I just want to end on this note. I have a little bit of scar tissue because when we launched the company, there was a thread on Reddit where someone was like, "I don't get why this is so revolutionary." Really for me, it just makes sense to adopt Git. It's not that it's like this crazy revolution, although I do think that the end result is huge for the space as a paradigm shift in development, but it also kind of comes down to these fundamental engineering best practices that I think we'd all agree on. It's important to have context on what code changed. It's super easy to adopt these solutions. Copying and pasting a file into a Git repository takes 10 minutes. It's ubiquitous and proven. It's been used for 15 years across many engineers, many engineering organizations, many high intensity engineering use cases, and it drives velocity and quality. So I'm not really advocating for some new magical solution. This is a proven solution. This is a proven tool chain. And it ultimately makes sense to adopt it. So with that, I want to thank everyone for their time. And I'm open to some questions as well, which I think Darren is going to drive. So.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. Hi, everybody. This is Darren Henry. I also work at Copia Automation on the marketing team. Adam, we do have a number of questions. I guess to start, can you go into a little bit more detail on how we visualize the ladder logic and show the diffs? The question is, do you need the license of the dev environment to see those visualizations?
Yeah, so you don't need the license of the dev environment to see those visualizations. The way we accomplish that is that we basically use the XML file formats, the output of the dev environment. So you obviously would continue to need the dev environment to write your code, but for the visualizations, you don't need it, particularly the browser-based ones. Okay,
great. And someone's asking about the Git concept of code owners. Does the Copia tool support the Git concept of code owners for facilitating and requiring reviews of pull requests by specific team members prior to merge?
Yeah, we have support for all that sort of gating. So for everyone's context, there's this kind of main branch that you're often maintaining on a repository. You say, this is the kind of master copy. This is the code that we consider to be the source of truth. A lot of organizations will try and protect that branch. So they'll say, hey, here's our 3 senior engineers who can actually approve code being merged into that branch, because those are the people that you want to have sign off. And we do support that concept within the product.
Thanks. And I do see our classic question. I see that Copia supports Rockwell, Siemens, Code Assist. Can you talk about the roadmap of supporting other industrial vendors?
Yeah, so we're really aggressively pursuing this. And I'd say this is where the majority of our engineering resources go towards. Right now, as you mentioned, we support Rockwell, Siemens, Code Assist. We do have limited back-off support. That's probably the next one to come to market. And then the 2 others that we're investing heavily in right now is Step 7 support for Siemens. And then as well as Schneider support control Unity. So we are focusing on investing in that. It's going to be a continuous turn the crank. If there are particular vendors that you really want support for, we're very responsive to the market on that. So we do want to figure out, what's out there. And we're just trying to, obviously capture as much of the market as possible in terms of a broad-based vendor support.
Yeah, and I should say that Gary specified Honeywell, Yokogawa, and Emerson. And I do think it's important to point out, Adam, that we do support the version control of all these different file types. It's actually the advanced capabilities of visualization that our integration roadmap is addressing. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. Git just stores files fundamentally. So there's no vendor that you can't use Copia for. All the additional support that we're talking about is for the visualization and the differentials and all of that stuff.
There's also a question about how is it installed? Can it be installed on a private server?
Yeah, so we support, we have our own public cloud solution, but we also have a self-hosted solution that you can deploy in a VPC, and we're multi-cloud. So you can use an AWS virtual private cloud, you can use a Azure one or a Google Cloud Services one.
Okay, and a new question just came in. How does the software platform version changes affect source control?
So basically, when you're saying software platform version changes, is that a reference to like Studio 5000, like V34, V33, or like TI Portal V16 or V17? In general, we just broadly try and support these. There tends to be when there's any launch of these, we obviously have to update our tool chain on the back end, but we do try and be pretty on top of these new vendor features.
All right, great.
Yeah,
I think that's all the questions. If you have a question, please pop it in the Q&A. Maybe it's a good time to talk about how do we do licensing? You mentioned different user permissions, including read-only licenses. Do you want to review really quickly how we license Copia?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is definitely one benefit, and this came up a lot early in the company history. People was like, well, we have all these people who aren't really even writing code. We just want them to look at it. And so basically our licensing is tied to write seats. So, we charge per write seat. We also provide discounts on like large number of seats, and then, annual and biannual deals. But yeah, basically it's by write seats, and then they're rotating. So you can move some customers to be read and some customers, or sorry, not customers, users or people on your team to be write users or read users. So you can kind of rotate seats around. So if you have some people who are working on a project, you can make them write users, and when they're off the project, you can move them to read users and rotate those seats to the team that's actively doing development.
And I also think it's important to point out that your repositories can be shared with your customers outside your organization. They can be included on that. So it's literally a collaboration platform that can span multiple companies.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, I think that's all the questions.
Cool. I should also mention, if you are curious about learning more about Copia, our website is copia.io. And then we do support free trial sign up directly on the website. So you can go sign up right now for copia.io/free trial, or just go to copia.io and press our free trial link. And then, obviously for this group in particular, because it's through CSIA, also feel free to reach out to me. I'm just adam@copia.io. So feel free to shoot me an email or a LinkedIn request or anything like that.
And we'll be at the CSIA executive conference as well. So you can meet us in that forum as well.
Yeah.
So the plug for the conference, Darren, appreciate that. I do have a couple more slides to share with the audience, and Jennifer's going to pull those up for me. On behalf of CSIA, I would like to thank Adam and for this informative discussion. I would also like to thank Copia Automation for sponsoring this event. And of course, thank you for attending. I'd also like to remind you that recording will be available for viewing within the next couple of days. Be sure to bookmark the CSIA events calendar so you don't miss any upcoming events. This concludes the program for today. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a great day.
Thank you.